Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Hi. So I have to look up. Today is the 20th of May. It is the 4th of Sivan, the 4th of the Hebrew month of Sivan, which is significant because the 6th of the month of Sivan, just in a couple of days, is Shavuot. And in our private Q&A, I will talk about that. But I want to say that in Israel, Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot, which I believe is also sometimes called the Feast of Weeks, is one day. But this year, because it's Thursday night and Friday, it leads directly into Shabbat. In the diaspora, the second day of Shavuot falls on Shabbat. Okay, so for us, it's Shavuot and then Shabbat. And for the diaspora, it's Shavuot and then Shavuot and Shabbat together on the second day. The reason I'm mentioning is because the Torah portion that they read in the diaspora is not the same one that the Jewish community in Israel is going to read. Okay. That means that the weekly Parsha will be out of sync and it won't be synchronized again until I looked it up until July 11th. Now, this is not an unusual occurrence. It happens every couple of years. But moving forward, when we are doing Haftarah, we are going to do the Haftarah of the Parsha as it is in Israel. And so I wanted to tell you that now so you're not confused, like your calendar says it's such and such a Parsha and I'm teaching you something else. Okay. So in Israel this week and in the diaspora next week, the Torah portion is called Naso, and it comes from the book of Numbers, from the book of Bamidbar, chapter 4, verse 21 to chapter 7, verse 89. The name of the parsha Naso, the Hebrew word, has a lot of connotations, but in this case, it means count, as in to take a census. And we find that, as always, in the very beginning of the parsha, in this case, in chapter 4, verse 22. So it talks about completing the head count of the children of Israel in the Sinai desert, and it identifies that 8,580 men from the tribe of Levi, the Levite men between the ages of 30 and 50, are counted in a tally of who's going to be doing the actual work of transporting the tabernacle. Okay, the temporary sanctuary in the desert. Also, what else happens in this parsha? God communicates to Moshe the laws of the sota, which is the wayward wife suspected of unfaithfulness to her husband. I actually thought, oh, I don't know if I ever went over this with you. It's a really fascinating concept of how the Torah allows for, or how the Torah deals with this concept of an adulterous woman. But that's Parsha, and we're doing Haftarah, so I didn't go there. There's also the laws of the Nazir, the Nazirite, the one who isn't going to consume wine or any products of the grapevine, lets his or her hair grow long, and is forbidden to become contaminated through contact with a dead body. That's also discussed in this Parsha. Also, Aaron and his descendants, who are the Kohanim, the priests, are instructed about how to bless the people of Israel. And then this is one of the longest parshas, if not the longest, because the leaders of each of the 12 tribes of Israel bring their gifts as offerings for the inauguration of the altar, and each one brings the exact same gift. And instead of the Torah saying, and every tribal leader brought the same gift, and here's what he brought, it repeats itself over and over and over again 12 times, which is very interesting. Also not our topic. Okay, so what is the Haftarah? What is the portion from the books of prophets for this week? It comes from Shoftim, from the book of Judges, chapter 13, verses 2 through 25. And you know that the Haftarah is always much, much shorter. And in this case, it's just a little bit more than 20 verses. It describes the birth of Shimshon, of Samson, who is a Nazirite from birth. Okay. And that fits because this week's Torah reading discusses the laws of being a Nazirite. So I'm just going to briefly go over this. And then, some weeks when I'm preparing, I think, oh, how am I going to what am I going to extract from the Haftarah that can make it relevant? And this week, Hashem gave me such a gift because, first of all, this is narrative. And second of all, there's strong female characters worth discussing with you. But also, this is a chapter in the book that I'm working on, the Hebrew women from the women from the nations in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so I'm gonna let me review the story in the book of Judges in the book of Shoftim, chapter 13. Here we have a man from the tribe of Dan, from the tribe of Dan. His name is Manoach. In the text, he's called Manoach, and he has a wife. She is not named in the text, okay? They have no children. And one day, somebody comes to visit the wife of Manoach and tells her that she's going to give birth to a child. This child is the messenger says to her, this child is to be a Nazarite his whole life long. And you, while you're pregnant, you should avoid the things that a Nazarite avoids. Not that you're taking it on, but from, like the way some women, when they are, after they conceive and they are very careful about what they take in while they are pregnant, like that. So the messenger says, no wine, no ritually impure food from the moment that you conceive. Okay. And then she's also informed that her son is going to save the Jewish people from the oppression that they are suffering under the hands of the Plishtim, the Philistines. This is what's going on in this time in history. Okay. The mother to be, whose name we don't know from the text, goes and tells her husband, hey, guess what happened? I was out in the field and this messenger came and he gave me this good news. And Manoach, the husband, says, he prays to God to send this messenger again. At this point, the couple is unaware that this messenger is actually an angel. So God sends the angel again. And interestingly enough, he comes once again to the wife. She brings him to Manoach, her husband. So we have like a little indication that the wife's spiritual level is somewhat elevated because she is the one who gets the visitation directly. Anyway, they come to Manoach. He repeats the good news, and then Manoach and his wife invite the angel to partake of this special honorary meal that they want to make. But the angel declines because obviously angels don't eat. But instead, he encourages Manoach to offer the goat that he was going to feed him to sacrifice to God. And then the angel disappears in this like wisp of um, whatever, in flames that also devour the sacrifice. And the Haftarah ends with the birth of Shimshon, where it says, and the lad grew and God blessed him. Okay, so that's the introduction. That's Haftarah, but that gives us a great opportunity to talk about women in the life of Shimshon because it's a very interesting way of looking at his life. So, in the chapter in the book that I'm preparing, I focus on Delilah, who is called in Hebrew Delilah. So I don't know, I may go back and forth. But let's just review who was Shimshon, who was Samson. By the way, it took me years and years and years to realize that the American brand of luggage that's called Samsonite comes from the idea that, Samson is very strong and this luggage is very strong. It was like a biblical branding thing. It was very funny to me when I realized it. But anyway, the story is told in Sefer Shoftim, in the book of Judges, chapters 13 to 16. He was a judge in Israel for 20 years, and he is obviously best known for his superhuman strength and for fighting from the enemies that were beleaguering the Jewish people at this time, who were the Plishtim, the Philistine nation. Okay, his strength, this part of the story comes from his lifelong status as a Nazarite, as a Nazir, and that it goes from when his mother was pregnant with him. And this is the quote that comes from the Haftarah, where the angel, this is what his message is to Manoach's wife. For you are going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head, for the boy is to be a Nazarite to Hashem from the womb on. He shall be the first to deliver Yisrael from the Philistines. That's in chapter 13, verse 5. Now, this is unusual because most Nazarites are adults who voluntarily take on this status for a temporary period of time. A person may choose to become a Nazir in order to seek greater holiness or to strengthen their self-discipline or to recover spiritually from some unhealthy behaviors or some excessive indulgence in something inappropriate. So Jewish tradition actually views the Nazir sort of in a complicated way. On the positive side, this is someone who's striving for holiness. And on the negative side, because Judaism generally prefers sanctifying ordinary things rather than withdrawing from them as a way of growing in holiness. So Shimshon is very unusual in being declared a Nazir before birth and for his whole life. But some say that the prophet Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, was as well. And if we look at 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11, the mother of Samuel, Hannah, vows that, quote, no razor shall touch his head, which is language associated with the status of being a Nazir. What's interesting about that is that that's exactly the same language that the angel uses in telling Manoach's wife that no razor should touch his head. And so the Talmud and a number of Jewish commentaries understand this as meaning, even though we don't really talk about Shmuel Samuel as being dedicated as a Nazir from his birth, some people say this is a biblical clue that he was. Okay, let's go back to Shimshon. As an adult, Shimshon is a complicated character because he has this inordinate obsession with women from the Philistine world, which eventually he channels for the sake of the Israelite nation. As a result of his relationship with women of this enemy, he comes into contact with them and is ultimately able to bring about their downfall. But in the text, he's associated with 4 women in particular: his mother and 3 intimate partners. His mother's name is not mentioned in Tanakh, but interestingly enough, we do have a Talmudic source that mentions her name. I'm just going to read this for you. I don't fully, I understand the name, but I don't fully understand something that it says. It's just a few sentences. This, if you want to look it up, it comes from Baba Basra 91a. The mother of Samson, it says, was named Tzelelponit, and his sister was called Nashyan. So the Gemara is another word for the Talmud. The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference as to what their names were? And the Gemara answers, it is important with regard to an answer for the heretics who inquire into the names of these women, which are not stated in the Bible. One can reply that there is a tradition handed down concerning their names. That's the part I don't fully understand. Who's the heretic? What question are they asking that's saying that their names, that the names of these women are actually preserved in our tradition? Does it come to answer? I don't have an answer for that. But in any case, the woman's name, Shimshon's mother's name, is known, and it is Tzelelponit. Okay. All in this passage, I didn't read you this part, but the paragraph before also records the names of the mothers of Abraham, of Haman from the Purim story from the book of Esther, and also King David. Okay. So Shimshon's first partner. So we have Tzelelponit, his mother, and her story is told in the text, even though she's not named. Shimshon's first partner is a woman from a city, a Philistine city called Timnah, and he's attracted to her. And the text tells us that he marries her, although the status of her, okay, Pearl's asking if I will spell Tzelelponit. Wait, you can't figure that out? I'm just kidding. This is how I spelled it in English. Tzelelponit. Tzelelponit. I have seen some slightly different transliterations of it, but that's Tzelelponit. That's how I pronounce it. Okay. So going back to the text, now I'm in the book of Judges, chapter 14, verses 1-3. This is about his first female consort. Okay. So here's the verses. Once Shimshon went down to Timnah, that is again the city in the Philistine territory, he noticed a girl among the Philistine women. On his return, he told his father and mother, who are, of course, Manoach and Tzelelponit, I noticed one of the Philistine women in Timnah. Please get her for me as a wife. His father and mother said to him, is there no one among the daughters of your own kinsmen, meaning among the Israelites and among our people, that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Shimshon answered his father, get me that one, for she's the one that pleases me. Okay. Not the warmest relationship between father and son, but that does in fact happen. And then we go, I'm not going to get into the details because I really want to focus on Delilah, but in the beginning of chapter 16, he's linked to a prostitute from Gaza. and it says, chapter 16, verse 1, once Shimshon went to Aza. There he met a whore and slept with her. Now, it doesn't say that he married her. Also, Aza, by the way, is the Hebrew word for Gaza. So the Philistine territory is, I don't know the exact borders, but it is basically where the Gaza Strip is now. Okay. Which is why Philistine, Palestine, if you can hear the similarity, um, that's not coincidental. Okay, the third woman mentioned. So now we have Tzeloponit, we have the Philistine woman from Timnah, we have the prostitute from Gaza, and now the fourth woman or the third woman with whom he's intimate is mentioned in the text is Delilah. In Hebrew, I told you we pronounce it Delilah. And this we find in chapter 16, verse 4. After that, he fell in love with a woman in the Wadi Sorek named Delilah. Wadi Sorek literally means the valley of Sorek, and it refers to the part of the land of Israel that's the border between Israel and the Plishti territory. So it's kind of a valley between modern day Gaza and where Israel, that's the non-disputed, well, it's really kind of the West Bank. But if you look on a map, you might not see Wadi Sorek, but you will probably see Nahal Sorek, which is the river there. Okay. The fact that Delilah comes from a border area mirrors her identity, because some say that she was Plishti, that she was a Philistine woman, who maybe she had a conversion that wasn't completely kosher or valid. It's unclear. Of the four women in his life, Delilah is the only name that's recorded in Tanakh. I told you that Tzeloponit, her name is, excuse me, it's found in the Talmud, but it's not found in the Bible. Okay. Delilah comes from the Hebrew root Dalid Lamed Lamed. What does that root mean? It means to lower something down, which is exactly, we're going to see, what she did to Shimshon. The same Hebrew root is related to, I'll give you three Hebrew words that are modern Hebrew words that share the same Hebrew root. One is dal, which means poor or weak or lowly. Dalut, which means poverty, and dalil, which is the modern Hebrew word for a bucket, like a bucket that is lowered down with a rope, like into a well to bring up water. Okay. So, why is this appropriate? Because we're going to see that there are three ways that Delilah weakened or lowered Shimshon. Okay. The first we find in chapter 16, verse 16. She weakens his will. And here's the verse. Finally, after she had nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was wearied to death. Now, what does that mean? So, this is a little explicit. The rabbis interpret this concept of pressing him constantly from this verse to mean that when they were intimate together, she withdrew from him. It's understood by the commentaries to mean that she used sexual frustration as a psychological pressure to force him to reveal his secret. So that's the first way. She weakened his will by this sexual game that she was playing with him. Then she weakened his strength. And here, a couple of verses later, chapter 16, verse 19, she lulled him to sleep on her lap. Then she called in a man and she had him cut off the 7 locks of his head. Thus she weakened him and made him helpless. His strength slipped away from him. Okay. So we know, because of his status as a Nazir, as a Nazarite, that his strength comes from the fact that the hair on his head was never cut. When in chapter 16, verse 19, the first time they cut his hair, he grows weak like an ordinary man. And then finally, there's a verse that tells us, so she weakened his will, she weakened his strength. And there's a verse that tells us that she weakened his connection to God. He was a judge, he was a righteous man with this weakness for Philistine women. And here in the very next verse, she cried, meaning Delilah, Shimshon, the Philistines are upon you. And he awoke from his sleep, thinking he would break loose and shake himself free, as he had done in other times, for he did not know that Hashem had departed from him. Okay. So besides losing his physical strength, he lost like the pipeline that he had to God, by virtue of the fact that he did reveal his secret to her, and she passed that secret on and they cut his hair. Okay. So those are the three ways that she diminished him or lowered him related to this root of her name, Dalid Lamed Lamed. There's another opinion that her name comes from a different Hebrew word, the word Lila, which means night. Okay, like we say Lila Tov, good night. Which is parallel to Shimshon, whose name is related to the Hebrew word Shemesh, which means sun. So one possible connection is just that the way that darkness of night overpowers the light of day, like there's when night comes, the day is diminished. So Delilah, related to night, found a way to overpower the superhuman strength of the son of Shimshon. I'm saying S-U-N, okay, the sunshine, the Shemesh of Shimshon. Now, while researching sources about her, there are three issues that remain unclear. And that's because in rabbinic sources, there are there's unclarity. So, but I think it's useful to let me identify what these three mysteries are about her, and also we'll go into them a little bit more. Okay, so I think it's just useful to know these are unresolved issues. One is, was she born a Philistine or was she born into the Israelite nation? Were Samson and Delilah actually married or were they just intimate partners? And the third is, was she a righteous partner who was reluctant to betray him, or did her loyalty lie elsewhere? You know, I've spoken to you many times about this idea that as we get closer to the Messianic era, that there will be an additional godly revelation of Torah, and that Mashiach ben David will teach us the rest of, like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, that's going to clarify all our unanswered questions. For now, though, these issues are unresolved, but I want to understand the various opinions with you. Okay. So the first is, well, there's no, what is the exact relationship between them? There's no mention, interestingly enough, even though the Bible is often very explicit about a woman's beauty, there's no mention of Delilah's beauty. In multiple other places, the Torah explicitly mentions when a woman is beautiful. So we have to assume that that wasn't a factor in Shimshon's love for her. So in Genesis chapter 24, verse 16, it says about Rivka, the maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known, blah, 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 blah. Okay. About Rachel, the Torah says, Leah had weak eyes, Rachel was shapely and beautiful. And about Bathsheba, that's also in Genesis 29:17. And then in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2, it talks about Bathsheba. Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the royal palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And that's a reference to Bathsheba. There's a book, I could not find the book on my shelf. I looked and looked and looked, but there's a book that I used to research this. It's called Samson's Struggle. It's by a Rabbi Gershon Weiss. And he paints a positive picture of her background and her character. He explains that the Hebrew word that is used to describe Samson's love for Delilah is from ahav, the connotation of which is it's a spiritual love as opposed to like just a mere physical attraction. And in the book of Judges, chapter 16, verse 4, it says, after that, he, meaning Samson, fell in love with a woman from in the Wadi Sorik named Delilah. Okay, so that translation of love is Ye'ehav, I think, which is from this root, meaning this kind of not just lust, but spiritual love. So, according to Rabbi Weiss, he says, this is a quote, when scripture states that Shimshon loved a woman and her name was Delilah, it is teaching us that she was a righteous woman and that Shimshon loved her because of her spiritual qualities. Indeed, Delilah's spiritual attributes appear to be rather exceptional. Otherwise, why was she willing to marry Shimshon? Was she not aware that he was a fugitive and she was always going to be in danger of being tortured to reveal his whereabouts? So Rabbi Weiss in this book further argues that the fact that the relationship between the two began as a spiritual pairing is a lesson for us. He says, thus we are shown, this is a quote, how Delilah, who was pure from material desires and who was loved by her husband, came to betray him for money. Okay. So he's saying she started out as somebody admirable who took a chance on being with this man who was a fugitive, who had lots of enemies in the nation of the Philistines. But even given that, she did, obviously, the text is very clear that she did betray him. But there's another opinion that from the beginning, and this is the one you're probably more familiar with, that his relationship with her was sinful. And this is from a commentary called Me'am Loez on chapter 16, verse 4 in the book of Judges. One sin leads to another. When a person is given into temptation once, this is a reference to Samson bedding Philistine women. It is that much harder to resist it next time. Having permitted himself to be seduced by the prostitute in Gaza, Samson was prone to be seduced again, and this time he fell in love with Delilah. Okay, so we don't know which it actually is. Laurie's asking, what could have changed her if she was not the person I had always heard she was? Okay, that's a good question for Q&A because I want to ask you more about what you thought about her before. But let's go on and let me finish the part that I prepared, and then we can do our Q&A. Okay, was she Jewish or was she an Israelite? Shimshon's first wife is clearly identified in the Torah as being from the Plishtim, being a Philistine woman. Okay, Judges chapter 14, verse 1. Once Shimshon went down to Timnah, and while in Timnah, he noticed a girl among the Philistine women. Okay, the Torah does not actually specify anywhere who Delilah's nation is. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of Esther when she first comes into the palace of Achashverosh, that she also, and we know as the reader that who her people are, but it isn't clear. Okay, so here's a commentary that I found. Delilah is not even called a Philistine, though it is usually assumed that she is for three reasons. One, Samson, we know, has a history of being attracted to Philistine women. Two, she is in direct communication with Philistine rulers, and it's unlikely that the Philistine leadership would seek the aid of an Israelite woman. And three, she does betray this hero of Israel to his enemies. So that's an opinion that she wasn't like so good from the beginning. There's a minority opinion that she was born an Israelite, but most all rabbinic opinions agree that she was Plishti. And as a matter of fact, they use her foreign status as an argument against intermarriage. Like you see what can happen if you take a partner from another nation. It's now Shimshon, I told you he was a leader in Israel. It makes sense to me that he would have had Delilah, as well as his first wife, undergo some kind of conversion, which clearly was neither completely kosher nor valid. Even if she did convert in some way in order to be with him, it's clear from what happens later that it was not the kind of conversion that a sincere convert that you might know who has a spiritual desire to follow the God of Israel converts for that reason. Even today, in the Orthodox world, if somebody is pursuing conversion, the rabbis want to make sure they are not doing that just because they want to marry a Jew. That is not true in liberal Jewish movements. It is much easier to convert if you are in a relationship with a Jewish person and you want to convert in order to join that person. But that's something that they rule out in the Orthodox world. Okay, now here's the question of, was she his wife? So he's a judge in Israel, and as a leader, he would have been held to some higher standard of ethical behavior, even though he had this dalliance with a prostitute and with a girl from the Philistines. Excuse me. His relationship with Delilah was more substantive. They clearly were intimate lovers, but it's not obvious from the text that they ever lived together or let alone were married. So some argue that it's not possible for someone of his stature to have this ongoing intimate relationship with a woman without marrying her. And in fact, the Talmud does say in one place that Shimshon married Philistine women, plural, implying that Delilah was indeed a second wife, because we know from the text that he married, his first wife was from Timnah, the Philistine city. Okay, so what is the dilemma that is facing Delilah? She is presented with a colossal dilemma by the leaders of the Philistines. Okay. And we see this chapter 16, verse 5. The lords of the Philistines went up to her, Delilah, and said, coax him and find out what makes him so strong and how we can overpower him. tie him up and make him helpless, and we will each give you 1,100 shkalim of silver, 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, note that they did not suggest that they want to kill him. They want to overpower him, tie him up, and make him helpless. If we're inclined to give Delilah the benefit of the doubt, we can say, well, she didn't want to betray him. So they had to bribe her with a huge bribe, 1,100 shkalim, whatever that is today. Let's just say $11,000 or whatever, like a huge amount of money. Then if we accept that she was loyal to him, it's possible to see why she might have agreed. Because at this point, number one, he's getting older. She could have reasoned that if she can keep him from fighting the Philistines, I mean, if he kept fighting the Philistines, he was eventually going to get killed because he was getting older. And she might well have convinced herself that it would be better if he just lost his strength and stopped fighting. Okay. So that's like on the side of she was looking out for him. It's also possible to conclude that the bribe was sufficient enough that it just worked. Because according to Rabbi Weiss, there were 5 men that came to her, 5 Philistine leaders, and they represented 5 main cities, Philistine cities. And there's an opinion that they didn't offer her 1,100 silver coins. They each offered her 1,100 silver coins. Okay. That's a lot of money. And if she did indeed convince herself that becoming weak as an ordinary man at his age was in his best interest, the money was like an added incentive. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about it. But there's an entirely different way of thinking about it that suggests that her loyalty actually was with the Plishtim all along. She was raised among them, she was of them. And although the Torah tells us that he loved her, it doesn't say that she loved him. So it's possible to conclude that she was manipulative from the very beginning. Okay. On chapter 16, verse 6, there is an opinion that she baited him in this way, saying that, oh, if you really loved me, you would reveal this, innermost secret to me. And this indicates a duplicitous character who would resort to this kind of low level of emotional blackmail. So what happened to her? So the truth is the text is silent because the story goes on to talk about Samson and the rest of his story. But later Jewish tradition and later commentaries speculate, but there's no single definitive answer. So there's basically 3 approaches that I found. One is that she just fades from the story, that the focus of Tanakh, the focus of the Bible turns to the downfall of Shimshon, his repentance and his final act of, bringing down the hall where this Philistine party was going on. And her later fate is not relevant to the biblical message, so we just don't know. That's one opinion. There's another opinion that suggests that a person who betrays someone else for money, like she did, or for personal gain, ultimately suffers disgrace. But there's no classical source that gives a detailed account of her punishment or her death. And then there's another opinion that since she worked with the Philistine leaders, that maybe she just remained among them, like she left Shimshon, and she may have died when he destroyed this Philistine temple at Gaza. It's so interesting. Many, many years ago, some of you may have seen this. There's a candle factory in Sfat in the north of Israel, and they have certain biblical scenes that are made out of candles, like wax. Like a wax museum, like a biblical wax museum. Funny enough, some years ago, the candle factory burned down, and they rebuilt some of it. But I remember seeing this scene made out of wax of Samson, like holding on to the posts of this Philistine temple in Gaza, with his big chest, and he's, because his hair started to grow back, and he's like, about to bring it down with all the people coming down. Anyway, so it's possible that maybe she died in that. The text is never clear. The Bible only records her repeated attempts to figure out what's the source of his strength, him revealing to her that his hair has never been cut, her arranging for his hair to be cut, and his capture by the Philistines. And then after that, she's never mentioned again. But I want to end with an intriguing possibility. There's a story later in the book of Judges, chapter 17 and 18. It's a story of Micha. And it's one of the Bible's strangest and most troubling episodes. And it takes place during the time when there was no king in Israel, right? So the Israelite society is somewhat chaotic at this point. So the basic story is that from the tribe of Ephraim, there's this man named Micha, and he tells his mother that he had stolen some silver from her. And she pronounced a curse on the thief. She realizes her silver's missing, and he is the perpetrator. So he fears his mother's curses, and so he confesses and he returns the money to her. And his mother responds by blessing him. And then she dedicates a part of this silver in order to make an idol, basically. And Micha sets up a private shrine in his house and he creates idols and he appoints one of his sons as the priest of this. Now, this is an Israelite, okay? So we already know this is not good that he set up this idolatrous shrine. Okay. Later on, there's somebody from the tribe of Levi, a Levite from Beit Lechem, from Bethlehem, which is very close to Efrat, shows up, and Micha hires him as a personal priest, thinking that, oh, well, he's from the tribe of Levi, he's going to be like a better priest than my son. And then in chapter 18, there are members of the tribe of Dan who steal the idols of Micha and there's a lot of idol worship going on in this part of the story, and they try to convince this Levite priest to join them instead, and they later establish this idol worship in the city in northern Israel that they conquer. Okay, why am I telling you this? Because in the book of Judges, chapter 17, verse 2, it reveals how many pieces of silver Micha originally stole from his mother. And this is the quote. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you and about which you did curse, and you also spoke it in my ear, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. Okay. So the number 1,100, it's not like a round number. It's an unusual number. And it may intentionally echo this story of the 1,100 pieces of silver that Delilah was promised by the Philistine rulers, either collectively or each of them was going to give her that. And so some commentators say, well, this repetition is deliberate. The link to both stories is about moral and spiritual corruption at the time of the judges, but it's also maybe a wink to us that the mother of Micha was Delilah herself. I don't have a definitive response to that, but I think it's more than a little interesting that suddenly, where does this woman from the tribe of Ephraim, where does she come to 1,100 pieces of silver? Exactly. So I found that really interesting. Now, in the past, I have shared with you Jewish music that relates to sometimes what I'm looking for the setting to share my screen with you. Hang on. Give me a second. Here we go. This is what I want. Okay. So I was looking like, is there, is there a song, a Jewish song about this story? So the first one I thought of was the Bob Jones song, Delilah, but that doesn't have anything to do with this. And then there's a more modern version called Hey There, Delilah by the White T-shirt. I don't know what it is, but that also has nothing to do. But I found this song by the Grateful Dead. So it's not like a Jewish song. I'm only going to play you less than a minute of it. But I want to make sure that I am sharing. Give me a second, because, oops, that's not, I want to make sure that I'm sharing and you can hear it. Boo, boo, boo. I lost you guys, wait. Thank you for your patience. I never do this smoothly. I'm so embarrassed. Share sound. Okay. So this is totally in English, but just, this is Samson and Delilah from the Grateful Dead. Just not if you can hear this, okay?
She climbed up on old Samson's knee, said, tell me where your strength lies, if you please. And she spoke so kind, and she talked so fair, till Samson said, Delilah, you cut off my hair. You can shave my head, clean as my hand, my strength coming natural as any old man. If I had my way.
Okay, that's that is basically the piece of the Samson. Oops, let me stop sharing. Okay, so that's the story of Samson and Delilah that I wanted to share with you. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut off this this recording of class and invite all of you, if you'd like, to. I know there were some comments I did not catch, so come back, go back into the original link, and let's do our private Q&A. Okay, I'll see you guys in just a minute.